Hello, everyone. This is our last presentation for the day. Heather and I will be back after this with just some closing thoughts, and we do invite everybody to come for that, and we'll put the link for that in the chat to make sure that you've signed up for that. Our last presenter is Amelia from American Wild Horse Conservation. You may know them as AWHC. Amelia is the Senior Communications Manager. Amelia brought her passion for horses to the advocacy world in 2018 when she joined AWHC's team. She spearheaded AWHC's investigation into the BLM Adoption Incentive Program, which led to national outcry and a front page New York Times expose. She looks forward to expanding AWHC's investigations program to uncover abuse and mistreatment of America's wild horses and burros. Amelia currently lives in Oregon and is the proud dog mom to her rescued dog, Mac. So welcome, Amelia, and I will turn this over to her. If you have questions for Amelia during her presentation, please add them to the chat. Welcome, Amelia.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Amelia. I'm so excited to be here. And before I dive in, I just want to say a huge thank you to Chris and Heather for putting this great summit together and for all of you to be here to talk about wild horses. I know we're all united in our love for them, and so I'm really excited to be here. And just thank you so much. And before I dive in, apologies. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm a little nasally, so I apologize for that. But I'm here today to talk about protecting America's wild horses and what AWHC does, including investigating the Adoption Incentive Program and advocating for in the wild conservation. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of what AWHC does, I wanted to introduce you guys who may not have heard of us or don't follow us as much to AWHC. So we're all driven by our passion for wild horses and burros and keeping them wild. We advocate for reform of the Bureau of Land Management's cruel and costly program by igniting wild horse and burro policy. So working in Congress to change the policy of the BLM and to redirect funding towards in the wild conservation, as well as pursuing strategic litigation to enact lasting change for wild horses and burros and keep them on our public lands for generations to come. We also set the conservation standard by investing in land acquisition, land trusts, and protecting public lands, as well as advocating for in the wild management solutions that would not include helicopter roundups. And we build public appreciation and informed advocacy. So many people don't even know that we have wild horses. And so we really want to bridge that gap between education and advocacy and bring more people into the world of wild horse protections. Because if there's one thing we know, it's that when people know about wild horses and know about the plight, they really care and they really want to take action. And these three tenets really just uphold our resolve to uphold America's promise to wild horses and burros, the original promise that was made in 1971 to protect them on our federal lands and protect them as an iconic species of the West and an iconic species of America. So I'm sure you've heard about this over the course of the summit, but I just wanted to give you a little context before diving into our investigations and all of that. The current state of wild horse and burros in terms of roundups is the Bureau of Land Management's program is costly and cruel. It's not the best way to manage wild horses. In fiscal year 2025, 11,000 wild horses and burros are set to be rounded up, and about 10,000 are set to be removed. The price tag for FY24, fiscal year 2024, was $153 million of taxpayer money. We've been on the ground last year at every major helicopter roundup, documenting the treatment of wild horses and burros, and really bringing the plight of them into the public eye. This year, we saw an increase in brutality and an increase in lack of transparency. You may have remember AWHC observers caught on camera a contractor brutally kicking and beating a wild horse, in a collapsed wild horse in the head, and we took that footage and brought it to the attention of Congress and the attention of the public and really sparked outrage there and a lot of action towards calling for a better way to manage wild horses and burros. In addition, we saw the lack of transparency. Our observers are continually placed further and further away from the trap site, and we're not able to see fully what's happening, but that's not stopping us. We're continuing to be at these roundups and continuing to document them and bring it to the public's attention. In terms of holding, it's just Simple. The BLM's holding system is broken. There's over 66,000 wild horses currently languishing in these facilities and in these pens, and the comprehensive animal welfare assessments continually show poor conditions, such as inadequate access to food and water, such as inadequate vet care, hoof care, vaccinations, and you can see that it leads to disease outbreaks and really inhumane treatment for our nation's wild horses and burros. And it's also important to know that the deaths don't stop when the helicopters land. AWHC's Freedom of Information Act work shows that the records we've received show that wild horses continue to be impacted after being rounded up, and many of them die in the days and weeks and months after the roundups happen. You see, as example, in the 2022 Twin Peaks roundup, our Freedom of Information records that were obtained by our team show that wild horses, including wild foals, were run so far in extreme heat to the point where the baby's feet were falling off, and many had to be euthanized as a direct result of that roundup. But the BLM does not count that in their roundup toll. And it's just clear this is an unsustainable system. We're reaching a breaking point. There is going to be a point where Congress no longer funds off-range holding, and Congress will no longer fund this program. And what happens next is opening the door to slaughter. So that's why the BLM in 2019 implemented the Adoption Incentive Program. The Adoption Incentive Program is a program that pays people $1,000 to adopt up to 4 wild unhandled BLM animals. That's $1,000 per animal, up to $4,000 in 1 year. It has no limits on the number of times you can participate in this program. So we've seen, as I'll go into, people coming back year 2, year 3, and year 4. And all adopters, it's important to know, all adopters sign under penalty of prosecution that they will not knowingly sell or transfer ownership of any animal to any person or organization that intends to resell or give away that animal for commercial processing or for slaughter. Advocates knew that this program would end in disaster for wild horses and burros, and unfortunately, we were right. AWHC launched an investigation in 2020, which is the first year that will see the impact of the AIP. And so far, we've documented over 2,100 wild horses and burros in kill pens. We were able to identify 855 of them by their BLM freeze mark. So that's the left mark on their neck. We were able to read the brands of 855, and we promptly filed Freedom of Information Act requests on those brand numbers to confirm their AIP status. We've shown that 70% of identified animals in kill pens have been adopted through the AIP. And I'll mention it a little bit later, but if anyone's used FOIA, you know it takes for a very long time. So the majority of those records are still pending. That doesn't mean 30% are not AIP. It just means the majority of them we don't have records back on yet. And even worse, we're showing that groups of related individuals are defrauding the system and raking in upwards of $82,000 of taxpayer-funded incentives. One family we've identified adopted 82 wild horses and burros and promptly, pocketed the incentives, and we've documented about 40 of their animals in kill pens at this point. And so it's clear that this program is defrauding not only the taxpayers, but it's coming at the expense of the horses' lives. And it's important to know that what we've documented is just the tip of the iceberg. This is only what we've been able to find through tracking kill pens on Facebook and on the ground reports. There are so many other ways that wild horses and burros are ending up in the slaughter pipeline that we're not able to document. So the extent of the abuse of the AIP is likely much wider than what we've been able to uncover. So as I mentioned, we use the Freedom of Information Act to investigate this program. We regularly file FOIAs on brands obtained in kill pens, and again, FOIA is a lengthy process, so we've had to file litigation at least 3 times to obtain these records. Either that's for over-redacting or they're just not even giving them to us. You can see on the left here that this is an example of a FOIA request we've gotten back that was over-redacted. Absolutely everything is covered up. We were not able to glean any information from this record, and so this is one that we filed an appeal over. Not only do we do legal action through the Freedom of Information Act, but we have actually filed litigation over the implementation of the AIP. The AIP was implemented through an IM, and it did not undergo the process of NEPA, which would allow for public input and this process is actually one of the only times that the public is allowed to give direct input into BLM policy. So failing to do this was a violation of the law, and so we promptly filed suit over that. And that case is still ongoing, and anyone that's interested, I recommend checking out our social media where we keep everyone apprised of developments in all of our legal cases. Our investigation was the basis for a New York Times expose that was published in 2021. It was on the front page, and it really sparked outrage in both the public and in Congress. One example is the late Dianne Feinstein sent a letter recommending investigation into the AIP and raising serious concerns over it. In addition, there's been work to get appropriations language that would call for an investigation of the adoption incentive program and potential for defunding. As a result of our investigation, the BLM enacted 2 sets of reforms to the program, but both fall short of actual protections for wild horses in burrows because they don't address the core issue with the AIP, which is the cash incentives. Anytime you mix animals and money, the animals always lose, and we are seeing that the animals are most definitely losing in this case. And just to put this in a little bit of perspective, this is numbers from the BLM's latest advisory board meeting. In fiscal year 2024, the BLM Adoption Sale Program placed about 6,600 animals. Only 4,900 of those were titled in that period, and only about 3,800 of those were adopted through the Adoption Incentive Program. And while that sounds like a good number of animals, in contrast, the BLM removed 17,000 wild horses in burrows and added them into holding. So it's really just simple math. The AIP, on top of being a way to abuse wild horses and abuse the taxpayers, it isn't even incentivizing enough adoptions to address the holding crisis that the BLM has created. One of the major threats to reform of the AIP is the recent PERC report in May 2024. PERC released a report that suggested actually increasing the cash incentives to incentivize adoptions. This attempts to legitimize a failed adoption process and completely glossed over any disadvantages to the program and didn't look at the impacts of the program on wild horses and burros. PERC is very influential in BLM policy, and this report coming from this think tank has continued to allow the BLM to wash its hands of this situation and continue to let the BLM prop up its AIP program. So not only does the AIP impact wild horses and taxpayers, it really impacts local and smaller privately funded rescues. By forcing the burden of protection away from the federal government and onto these privately funded rescues. There was a huge influx of wild horses and burros into the rescue market, and many rescues were not or are not equipped to handle wild animals, which that's what these animals are. They're wild. And so they may not have the proper chutes or the proper fencing to ensure that the wild horses are treated the way they should be. And so AWHC's grant program has helped provide capacity building grants in this way to help us increase the ability or the availability of rescues to take these wild horses and burros in. But the reality is there's too many horses ending up in the slaughter pipeline for rescues to save them. And so we're at a really unfortunate tipping point with the number of horses in the slaughter pipeline. So if not AIP, then what? We know that there are a lot of horses in holding, and they don't deserve to just stay there. So the BLM should invest in responsible adoption and sale programs, and the way to do that is to abandon the cash component of the AIP and instead offer veterinary vouchers. Offering veterinary vouchers is still in the spirit of the Adoption Incentive Program, which is incentivizing and providing support for the first year of care for adopted wild horses and burros. And it's really important to know that there's already a structure in place to do this. The BLM already offers a voucher program for gelding vouchers. So really, it's not a bunch of new resources that the BLM needs. It really just reflects a resource reallocation. And the BLM must draw the line in the sand in this program, and it must investigate and prosecute any violations of those contracts that I mentioned earlier. Currently, we don't know of any case that has been investigated and brought to the DOJ for prosecution. And the BLM should work with rescues to place older or disabled horses in burrows to alleviate some of those holding, the burden of holding, as well as placing these horses in good homes. And of course, the BLM has to stop the bleeding. It has to prioritize in the wild conservation solutions like fertility control. So what exactly are in the wild solutions? We recognize that every horse adopted out makes room for a horse that's rounded up. So we have to stop. We can't talk about off range without talking about on range. And the BLM just plainly must stop the cycle. It must stop rounding up wild horses in mass like this. Fertility control is a stepping stone to larger reform. We recognize that the BLM has created artificial boundaries for wild horses and artificial habitats and has made a man-made habitat for them. And anytime that there's any man-made habitats, there has to be management of it. So while AWHC recognizes that the AMLs are too low, they have not been evaluated since 1971, and we are working towards that larger policy goal of changing that. There has to be something done in the meantime, and for us, that's fertility control, because it keeps wild horses in the wild where they belong and does not rely on helicopters to round them up. Another thing we focus on and we advocate for is land trust, land repatriation, and improving habitat. AWHC has a land trust in Nevada that acquired 3,300 acres of land in key habitat near wild horse herds, and we're currently undergoing reseeding that area, building up springs, and protecting that habitat for those horses in that area. And we do run fertility control programs using PCP. Before I dive into the nuts and bolts of our fertility control programs, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we evaluate fertility control and how we promote it and support it. So fertility control must be humane. It must be effective. It must be reversible. AWHC does not support sterilizing wild horses. It must be minimally disruptive, so not ripping horses from the land and separating from all they hold dear, family and freedom. It must be cost effective, so we're saving taxpayer money while supporting horses in the wild. It must be scalable, so it must be done at a level that will actually help manage populations, and it must be tried and tested. It has to be supported by science. So AWHC uses PCP. When evaluating all of that, the one that we come to is PCP. So the world's largest PCP program for wild horses is implemented in Reno, Nevada on the Virginia Range horses. There's a 3,500 horse population on approximately 300,000 acres. And this is a really unique area because these horses are not federally protected, and their habitat is being encroached upon by rapid development. So recognizing that, we recognize the need for management, and that's why we use this fertility control to stabilize the population. We've seen a 67% reduction in foaling rate since 2020. And on the right there, you can see a graph by months showing the last 4 years of data. And you can see we're really starting to stabilize that population, again, in an area where they're rapidly losing their habitat. AWHC also runs a program in the Cedar Mountains in Utah. This is really important and a really cool program because we've darted 46 mares in an area that was previously believed to be undartable. So one of the BLM's main arguments against using fertility control is that it won't work for all herds because the horses are too wild. And so not only are we proving that fertility control is a viable solution to managing populations, but we're proving that it can be done. You just got to get creative. You just got to be in the field, and you have to know these horses. And so that's what our Cedar Mountain program is showing. Oh, going too fast. Our fertility control program is peer reviewed and scientifically validated. So the data from the Virginia Range was analyzed by a researcher at the University of Pretoria who is the leading expert on immunocontraceptive for wildlife like elephants. The study concluded that the program vaccinated about 3/4 of the mares in the Virginia Range and saw about a 60% reduction in full birth within those 4 years that were analyzed. AWHC joined other wildlife experts at the 39th Annual World Veterinary Congress in Cape Town, South Africa. This was a really great way to come together with other experts to talk about other kinds of wildlife fertility control management. Our team got to see elephants and hear about how they're managed with PCP and other wildlife species as well. In the last 5 years, AWHC has administered has administered 10,000 fertility control treatments, which is more than double what the BLM has done at the same time. So not only are we talking the talk, but we're walking the walk and showing that it can be done. Other fertility control methods are definitely a topic of conversation, so I'm just going to go through three quickly. Gonacon. This is one that many people are talking about, and rightfully so. Um, as at its current state, Gonacon is unpredictable. It has unpredictable efficacy and unpredictable reversibility. There have been 0 studies released or published on the efficacy of Gonacon with a 30-day booster, and this is how BLM is currently administering Gonacon. They're rounding them up, administering the first dose, holding the mares for 30 days, and then releasing them with that booster. There's a potential for sterilization. Baker et al., a scientific study, showed that there was an overall return to fertility of about 40% when combining all boosting treatments. So that's definitely an area of concern. And it's very concerning that the BLM is increasing its use of Gonacon and plans to administer it in all of its planned roundups for FY25. Um, Gonacon does not, in its current form, AWHC does not support the widespread use of Gonacon because it is not scientifically validated, it is not tried and tested, and there is that potential for sterilization. Another form of fertility control that the BLM is currently evaluating are IUDs. They're impractical for free-roaming mares because they cannot be administered when the mare is pregnant. Mares have an 11-month gestation period, so it's a really long time, and it's almost impossible to know when they're rounded up if they're pregnant or not, oftentimes. There's also been documentation of uterine inflammation and fluid retention, raising concerns about the humaneness of using these IUDs, and there's mixed results in retention. Many of them fall out, and there's not a lot of studies that show, they show how they're used and how they can be used. So in their current form, AWHC does not support them as well. Surgical sterilization, gelding is one that many people talk about. And if this was actually to be used as a management technique, every single stallion would need to be gelded to reduce population growth. And that's removing the wild from the wild horses. It's altering stallion behaviors. And that's not something that AWHC supports. And then the other one is ovarectomy via colpotomy. This is surgically invasive and permanent sterilization of wild mares. AWHC has been fighting against the surgical sterilization of wild mares for almost a decade, and we've successfully sued multiple times to stop surgical sterilization experiments on wild mares, and we're continuing to monitor it and take action when needed to make sure that our wild mares are not subjected to this really inhumane surgical technique. And really, it comes down to ethical and economical. Fertility control is more cost effective and it's more humane, and it does what we want. It keeps wild horses in the wild where they belong. It's $3,500 for lifetime treatment for a mare versus $48,000, excuse me, for lifetime confinement. And this, again, it's a stepping stone management technique. The choice right now is do nothing or and let helicopters come, or administer fertility control and really manage these horses within these artificial boundaries that are put up, and keep them wild while we work toward long-term goal of reducing private interest competition, and reevaluating those AMLs based on current science. BLM removes 10 to 20K horses a year. If it darted the same number, it would stop the need for roundups. And it would not sterilize the horses, and it would just keep them wild without affecting those natural behaviors. It keeps wild horses wild when used responsible and humanely, and that's what we advocate for. And so, if you have any questions, I am ready to take them.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Go through the chat. Are wild horse sanctuaries taking advantage of the BLM adoption program? Do you know the incentive program?
I believe some of them do use the AIP to help support their programs. But again, it's a widespread, the abuse of the AIP is a very widespread issue. And it would be more effective to reimagine the AIP than that, and that would protect more horses.
Linda wants to know, what were the 2 reforms to AIP that were enacted after the New York Times article?
Yeah, so the BLM, one of them was the BLM originally administered the AIP incentives in two payments, so one at time of adoption and one at time of titling. So that was a year apart, $500 in the beginning and $500 at the end. It made that all one, so you get $1,000 at the end of the waiting period. And then it also reduce the number of people that can sign off on compliance inspections to only humane officers and BLM personnel rather than having volunteers or anyone else sign off in compliance inspections.
Someone asked this question, and I did put a PDF in the chat on the Citizens Guide to NEPA, but can you explain the NEPA process? It was mentioned a couple times, so I know
Yeah.
it's really complex, but
Yeah, it's very complex. So NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act, and this allows for potential policies to go through various stages of input from the public and evaluation of their impacts. So you might see, if you're on our mailing list, you might see us asking for you to make public comments. That is thanks to NEPA. It allows the public to weigh in on these types of management decisions. And then the BLM or any other agency like the Forest Service or the National Park Service will then evaluate the comments that are made, and they're supposed to take those into consideration when making final decisions.
Jeannie wants to know, she said, you said the BLM should stop roundups, yet you suggest PZP. How much influence does your organization have to influence PZP? And its experts in Cape Town research be allowed to use for US land and wild horses for your organization? I took a class in the seminar and an expert said there were only 40,000 wild horses in the wild. How do you justify PZP?
Well, there's not only 40,000 wild horses left in the wild, first off. Second, yeah, BLM should stop roundups, and you don't need to round up wild horses to administer PZP. It can be administered via remote darting, which is both of what our programs do. So we work in Congress to reform the BLM's program through the appropriations process by allocating funding towards PZP programs. Last 3 years, we've secured up to $11 million in PZP programs, PZP funding, and we hope to continue that and make that language stronger to make sure that the BLM really and uses that funding to administer this in the wild. Population management. Again, PZP is not a sterilant. It is a way to manage horses within these artificial boundaries that the BLM has placed on them. No management means no horses. And I think it's important to know that while there are a very low number of horses in the wild, the BLM's national AML is 27,000. So even if we have a low number of horses in the wild and we just leave them alone, the BLM will continue to round them up until they try to get to that 27,000. So again, PZP is a stepping stone. It is a way to stop those inhumane roundups, manage the populations and as they are now, while working towards reevaluating those national population levels and making sure that they're up to date. They haven't been reevaluated since 1971. So making sure they're up to current ecological conditions and really to benefit the horses, not private interests.
Do we have an idea of how many wild horses there are still on public lands?
Yeah, it's on the BLM website, and I can definitely pull that as in a minute. Yeah.
Someone asked, what if your organization adopted the horses and then leased the land like the cattle ranchers do?
That is not a solution that AWHC promotes, because by adopting the horses, you're stripping them of their federal protections. Um, one thing that's so unique about us and so unique about America is that we have these wild horses that they are federally protected. The only other species that's protected with a law like this, single to them, is the bald eagle. And so it shows the importance of our wild horses on to the public. And so adopting them would strip them of that. And again, it would place them into another artificially made boundary that they would not have federal protections against slaughter. It would take the wild out of the wild horse, essentially.
you said that the BLM's target is, did you say 24,000 for wild horses nationally?
The BLM's national AML is 27,000 wild horses. That it's the number that they deemed in 1971 with with when the law passed, and it's also the number that that wild horses were considered fast disappearing at. So, appropriate management levels are probably a presentation that all on their own. They're complicated, but really the National Academy of Sciences said that they're unfounded, they're not scientific, and they should be reevaluated with a more transparent process. And so that is a huge policy lift. That is a huge long-term goal that we are working towards. That's not something that can be done overnight in a month or even in one Congress, one congressional session. It's something that is really long term. So while we're working towards that, something needs to be done in that meantime to make sure we don't lose all of our wild horses to holding facilities. And so through that, that's where the PZP comes in. It does not affect natural behaviors. I do see a question in there about the pregnancy. Uh, it does not, the way that fertility control works, PZP works, is it's an immunocontraceptive vaccine. It stops pregnancy without affecting natural behaviors, without affecting hormones. It is safe to use if a mare is nursing or has a foal by her side, and it does not affect those natural behaviors, which is a huge reason why we support it. It keeps wild horses wild.
Did you find where it says how many wild horses we have?
Yes. Let me, oh, I'm sorry. You can probably see that now. 73,000.
And then my next question to you is, how do we know that that number is correct? Because I know we talk about all the time how the BLM is inflating numbers, and or numbers seem to fluctuate at really crazy ways. So
Yeah, at its current state, we have to take that number at its face value because we don't have any other population surveys. But it is important to know that the way that the BLM does population surveys is could be improved, and so definitely that's something to look into evaluating the actual population of wild horses and burros. But no matter what that number is, the issue doesn't change. That the BLM is going to try to get it down to 27,000. And they're going to do that until their population estimates listed at 27,000. And so that's why bringing in that stepping stone and stopping this kind of blunt force approach to management is critical to protecting our wild horses and burros.
is that something that's on the agenda for AWHC to do a population survey of your own? It would seem like that would be a way to possibly challenge some of the roundups even.
That's a great question. It's definitely something that we're looking into. Population survey is expensive and it's a long process, especially over all the 10 Western states and the various HMAs. But it's something that is important to look into.
Okay, Kim said sanctuaries in general need to be vetted. And I think that that brings up a good question because we've seen a lot of things with sanctuaries and stuff too. So how do we get some kind of regulation there?
Absolutely. I mean, AWHC, we have our own internal way of evaluating who we work with and what sanctuaries we support. But it is so true that, and so many of these sanctuaries have really good intentions, but again, they're not equipped to handle wild horses and burros and all that comes with that. So, I don't know if there's like a national way to evaluate sanctuaries, but um, you can look at, how long that they've been around, their public records and all of that to make sure you're making the right choices, and where their finances go, if you're sure you're making the right choices and supporting them. One really great one way that we support rescues is actually through the Homes for Horses Coalition. This is a coalition of over 500 rescues that are dedicated to promoting equine protection through, they come together to lobby and pass policy change. They support everything from domestic horse policy to wild horse policy, and all of those are really, really fantastic sanctuaries that have been vetted, that have been here long term, and that are really coming together to protect wild horses. It's Homes for Horses Coalition. It's really great.
Linda wants to know, how do you know if the mare in the wild is pregnant before darting?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, PZP is safe to use on a mare that may be pregnant. It does not affect hormones, and it's safe to use on mares that have foals on their side. So it doesn't terminate pregnancy. It doesn't stop that. It will just stop them from getting pregnant again.
Do you think that I'm asking this because of course we have Gonacon Haven here at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Do you believe that Gonacon does is a little bit more damaging if mares are pregnant?
I'm not sure of any the studies on that, but I do know that it is it's really not studied well enough to make like a conclusion on it, and that's why we don't support it because it's not tried and tested. It's not we don't support it in its current state with the current science that's backing it.
Can we challenge that use then, since it doesn't have the data to support it?
That's a great
Is
question. It's
it
something
something
that
we take
we're
to Congress?
Yeah, exactly. That's why we're working so hard to prove that PZP is a viable option because if we have the data that shows this has been used for 30 years, this has been used on these horse populations, this has been used to reduce or stabilize populations in these areas, there's no reason they shouldn't use PZP. And so the more data that we can provide through our fertility control programs, the more we bring that to Congress, the more we bring that to the public to write to their members of Congress, and the more that we can get stronger language and appropriations or in reform legislation to advocate for that specific type of fertility control.
Who protects and provides accountability for the wild horses under the USDA Forest Service?
So the Forest Service manages wild horses as well in their territories. They often work with the BLM, but we do see like a lot of a lack of transparency with the Forest Service that I know we see it with the BLM, but we definitely see it with the Forest Service as well. They're their own federal agency that has their own protections and programs, but those horses are also protected under the 1971 Act.
Stephanie said, can you please explain the BLM letter sent to either the auction house or the AIP adopter who dumps their titled horse? They just argue now the horse is titled and not our problem.
Yes. So one major thing that we're running into with the BLM is that it's completely washing his hands of the AIP and the issues with it by saying, well, these horses are titled, they're no longer property of the US government, and you can do whatever you want with them. AWHC's argument to that is that the BLM has a legally mandated responsibility to ensure a humane outcome for all wild horses and burros that it removes from the range. And it's just very clear, their own records show that the AIP is not that humane outcome. Far too many horses end up in these kill pens or these bad situations. BLM posts notice at many auctions, not a lot of auctions, that you cannot sell an untitled wild horse or burro. And one thing that we're actually seeing is that the kill pens will text the BLM and say, we have this brand number, is this a horse that we can sell or not sell, and the BLM will sign off on it or repossess the animal if it's not titled.
Wendy wants to know, how good are their projections when the BLM ignores the law?
Can you clarify what that means?
How good are the protections on the
Protection.
horses?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I thought you said projection. Protections. The original intent of the 1971 law was a really good intent. Unfortunately, the law has been weakened over time. So a lot of people ask, why are these helicopter roundups happening? How are they not illegal? It's because of these protections, how they've been weakened by special interests. One example is the 2004 Burns Amendment, which essentially opens the door to slaughter for all horses and burros and holding. One thing we fight for every year in appropriations is maintaining a prohibition on wild horse slaughter. And so it is not legal to sell a wild horse for slaughter. But the law has just really been weakened by special interests, and that's why we work in Congress to secure the support of congressional members and really uphold the original promise of the law and the original intent of it, and to make sure that it's strengthened back to how it was and even improved.
I don't know if you want to, I know that she's not feeling well too, so you guys know she's recovering from a cold. If you want to take a breath and take a drink, the questions just keep coming. So as
It's
long
totally
as you're
fine.
willing to come, I
Yeah,
was willing to
absolutely. I've got
stay.
my water right here, so I'm ready.
Are there lawsuits for public access to holding facilities for inspections and CAWP compliance?
Yeah, so one major issue with holding facilities is that many of them are private, so we're only allowed on those properties when they open it up for a tour. So that's something that we're really looking into is how to ensure the public can hold holding facilities accountable, and by allowing people on property as well as having these CAWP COP inspections. COP is it's a good start. It's not strong enough because it's only internally enforceable by the BLM. It's not enforceable by any outside agency. So even if these COP standards are assessments are done, no one can enforce the fixing up of the facilities unless the BLM enforces it. So it's a really important thing to even get some animal welfare standards, but there's definitely room for improvement in there as well.
Kim wants to know, is anyone working on the ones in holding to try to get some of them out?
Yeah, so one thing that, we would be evaluating is redesignating HAs, herd areas, which have been historically zeroed out wild horses and remaking them HMAs for potential relocation. The issue is all of the horses that were in the holding, all the stallions have been gelded, which is unfortunately it it alters their ability to be wild. It takes away their wildness, it alters their behaviors, and so it's not really a viable thing to put them back out in the wild and expect them to be the same, to expect the herds and the bands and all of that to be the same. So, AWHC supports, again, responsible adoption programs, responsible sanctuaries, taking families and taking wild horses and protecting them in a domestic setting.
David wants to know, what do you envision with the new administration and Elon Musk running roughshod over established government policy and programs?
I think with this new administration, it's going to be an interesting time. We are cautiously optimistic about uh, the Burgum being confirmed as the Secretary of Interior. So we're really definitely looking at how that's going to play out and proactively getting involved with new members of Congress to educate them on the wild horse and burro issue and why this is so important to them. It is a conservative Congress now, and one really strong argument that we have is that this is a fiscally irresponsible program. And so, making sure that, I always say if you don't care about, the animals, which I think we should all care about the animals, but if you don't care about the animals, you should care about the money because your taxpayers, their constituents' taxpayers are going to this completely mismanaged system when there's a completely different way to do it that would save taxpayer money. So that's something we're really focusing on in our congressional outreach and in our activities.
And David, just to answer, this is the biggest reason why Heather and I put this summit together. We know that a lot of people are concerned about the new administration coming in, possible changes, and worst case scenarios that we're envisioning. And really, the answer is we just have to get louder and we have to keep pushing forward. So that's why we did the summit this weekend, so that everyone can get as much information as they can to have educated conversations with their lawmakers and their legislators. And we talked about today the press. We're going to work on getting the videos up on our YouTube channels as soon as possible. We do have all of Thursdays up, and I'm hoping by the end of today to have Friday up too. So we just have to keep doing what we're doing no matter who's there. So
And that's so true. It's so important. If you're a member of Congress, doesn't even know about this, how can they take action on it? So, writing and being involved and setting up meetings with their staffers is so critical. The Wild Horse movement was born out of a grassroots coalition, a grassroots base, and it continues to be fueled by that. So, everyone here, it's so important for you to be here and so important for you to continue to make your voice heard loudly. And the facts are there. This program could be reformed, and it should be reformed.
and we were talking before everybody came in. Amelia asked me what I thought of Governor Burgum, and I told her, this is a conversation that's come up several times. And I think Chad Hansen said it the best, and he's the one who said cautiously optimistic. So, but again, no matter who is there, we talked about this with John Eagle this morning. We asked him flat out, what happened to Secretary Holland, and why wasn't she on the side of wild horses? And his answer was, truthfully, it doesn't matter what Bergam or Holland are doing. If we don't get the policies changed, it doesn't matter who's sitting there, their hands are tied in that way. So again, we have to keep contacting our legislators and fighting to get policy changed, because that's where the real problem is. So
Absolutely.
um, we knew this was going to come up, so we warned Amelia ahead of time. Can you discuss the lawsuit scheduled for March in Denver?
Yes, absolutely. So that is a culmination of a decade-long battle led by AWHC for the protection of the checkerboard horses. The BLM, at the request of the RSGA, so that's the Rock Springs Grazing Association, has laid out plans to eliminate like millions of acres of public land, of public habitat for wild horses, as well as zero out herds and slash the populations of others in the area called the Wyoming Checkerboard. AWHC has been continually suing over this and continually going into court and fighting for the rights of these wild horses and wild horses that live there. And now we are set in March is the oral arguments for our appeal. Back in July, we had oral arguments for the complaint at the lower level of court. Unfortunately, the judge ruled in a way that was more for the BLM and more against us and our co-plaintiffs. But ultimately, we knew that this decision was going to be decided at the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is where it's happening in March. And so either whether it's we elevated it to the appellate court or the BLM elevated it to the appellate court, we knew it was going to be decided there. AWHC in the past has had strong success at the 10th Circuit, so we are looking forward to continuing that case there and continue those oral arguments there in March, and it should be um, it should be a good time to show out for our wild horses and burros.
Nancy's asking for clarification. Are there 73,000 horses free and 66,000 in holding?
Correct. And I think in the chat, someone linked, but you can go to BLM program data, and that has 73, it has the population estimates in the wild, as well as the holding estimates, adoption rates, and all of that kind of stuff. It's very useful to see.
Linda wants to know which senators are the toughest to deal with.
There's a lot of not a lot, but there are senators that are backed by private interests, such as livestock industry. And those are the toughest to break through. But I will say we have some really, really great support. I think this year we secured the support of 15 senators in our appropriations, and they're really great champions for wild horses and burros. And we look forward to continuing working with them and also expanding our reach in the Senate.
I want to also say, Linda, this is where you having a relationship with your own senator is important, because I can contact your senator in another state and it's not going to be as impactful as hearing from you. That's something that we've learned over the last few years. So everybody having relationships with their own senators is really very important. So
Exactly. And, I will say oftentimes if you want to set up a meeting, you'll set up a meeting with a staff person, but those don't be discouraged that you're not meeting with your senator or your representative. Those staff people are critical to shaping policy, so educating them on the issue, providing them with the facts and the details on the issue is going to directly impact how the senator or representative votes in Congress or what they support in Congress. So meeting with representatives of their office is so impactful, and please set up if you ever are interested in that and want some help. I'm sure people here can help, but if you reach out to us, we would be happy to facilitate setting up a meeting for you as well.
the other thing too is we have to just keep remembering that these people work for us. We hire them every election day, when they come up for reelection, and they truly do work for us. And if we don't tell them what the issues are, if we don't tell them what we want changed, they don't read minds. That's a big thing too. So
Absolutely.
Terry wants to know, do we have a list of good sanctuaries? I think that'd be
I
really.
would Yeah, I would check out the Homes for Horses Coalition. Again, that's a group of 500, but they have a really great resource library where you can find sanctuaries in your state.
Okay, let's see. So no organization is suing the BLM for only GhanaCon in 2025?
That litigation is not currently, we're not currently pursuing that. There's not, when AWHC evaluates legal action and what we pursue and what we don't pursue, we have to consider the precedent that it could set if we lose. And so we have to be really strategic about where we file lawsuits so that we make sure we set good legal precedent for generations to come. And if we lose, it won't negatively impact the horses. So we really pursue cases that are going to have that lasting positive impact.
Um, have you seen any working relationships between kill pen owners asking for bail for Mustangs or burros and BLM employees? It seems on Facebook that many know each other well. So I don't know again how much are we trusting social media?
Yeah, again, we've seen that relationship where the kill pen operator will text the BLM and ask if this horse is okay to be sold or to be sold at auction, and the BLM will sign off on it. So we know that they know the extent of what's happening, they know the problem, and they just continue to ignore it. Whether it's, willful ignorance or it's part of their plan, they're just continuing to ignore it.
Sheila wants to know what is PERC, PERC?
What was that?
What is PERC, PERC?
Oh yeah, that's the property. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the full name of it. It's a conservative think tank that comes up with public policy. And I can find it really quickly as well. Apologies.
Isabella wants to know why I'm guessing the Wild Horse and Burro Act was never examined and revised in all these decades. And I think that it's been amended, but it always gets amended against the wild horses themselves.
Exactly. So sorry, PERC is the Property Environmental Research Center. So answering that one. But the law has been amended. Again, in 2004, it was weekend with the Burns Amendment. Opening up the act is not a thing that you do unless you're confident that you're not going to allow for more negative provisions to be added that would negatively impact wild horses and burros. So while we're evaluating the perfect time to really look at re-strengthening the act, there's other ways to protect wild horses and burros through public policy, whether that's through appropriations, which is how we work often with the fertility control funding, or introducing bills like Dina Titus's Wild Horse Protection Act of 2023-2024, which would ban the use of helicopters in roundups as well. So there's many avenues to protect them while we're ensuring that the act is not opened up and weakened even further.
Um, so this person's asking, have you used PCP on animals like horses before? And so this has been authorized for use since 2012. And they also want to know, how do you manage the gene pool in terms of use of PCP?
Yeah, PCP is backed by 30 years of science, not only in wild horses, but in other wildlife species. So I don't know if anyone knows the Chincoteague wild ponies or the Assateague ponies, they're actually managed by PCP. They have been for 30 years, and they've been managed successfully. Other wildlife species like elephants, it's been administered on and it's been administered on successfully. And so, the key to any of these programs is really good documentation. So all of the horses that AWHC darts are documented in a database where we know their full life history, we know what babies they've had and all of that. And so again, it's not a permanent sterilant. So if one mare gets treated a year and has and does not have a baby that foaling season that she's been treated, she's still able to continue to contribute to the gene pool the next year or whenever. So there is it's not a sterilant, so it's not stopping the gene pool. It's just allowing that population to stabilize in areas where there might be habitat, there might be competition for resources, and keeps them wild without rounding them up.
I think too, we could say, PZP and all these other different tools that the BLM, the Park Service, the Forest Service use, can be used responsibly or irresponsibly. And for example, I know from talking to the Chief of Resource Management at Assateague, they really look at the genetics before they treat any mares with PZP and make sure that those horses that's responsible management. Is that happening everywhere? No, but that's where we need to raise our voices. So,
Absolutely.
Nancy, very proud of you, Nancy, for paying attention this weekend. Are you helping boroughs too? She wants to know.
Absolutely, yeah. I focus mostly on wild horses, but AWHC does advocate for burros. We were working in California to put up, I believe it was California, or maybe it was my Arizona, I believe. Sorry, to put up help a local advocate put up signage for wild burros and raising awareness about the specific and unique issues that burros are facing. One thing that we're really focusing on is the impact of roundups on wild burros, because they're a lot more brutal for them. The wild burros, they don't run in herds like the wild horses do, so they often stand their ground against the helicopters, which can lead to more abuse and mismanagement by helicopter operators. And then we see that the toll that it takes on them is quite higher as well. So we're looking into the effects of helicopter roundups through the use of FOIA on wild burros. The records we obtained showed that in the Blue Wing Complex roundup in 2022, I believe, as well, or 2023, many pregnant jennies died of something called hyperlipidemia, which is a stress-induced condition. So we're really starting to build the basis of understanding how these roundup affect wild burros and how we can protect them that way.
Jeanette wants to know, will AWHC talk, write, or meet with Doug Burgum?
I definitely any opportunity if we got a opportunity and we're pursuing meeting at that level, we would absolutely take it.
Kim wants to know, how does AWHC feel about the Wild Horse Fire Brigade idea? And Kim, I'm just going to intercept and say, I feel like we left a lot on the table for that talk that we had. Um, we are inviting them to come and speak with us again so that we can continue the conversation. But Amelia, you can go ahead and speak.
Yeah, thank you. Wild horses for fire management is a good idea. They do graze down that grass that is very flammable. Where AWHC differs a little bit is we don't support removing wild horses from the federally designated habitat and placing them in national forests. That's kind of like adopting out all the horses and putting them back on, released land. It would strip them of their federal protections. They would no longer be federally protected wild horses and burros. So that aspect is not something we support, but definitely doing more research into how wild horses can benefit public lands and benefit fire mitigation is something that we definitely are looking into and are continuing to evaluate and support.
Because those are questions that we ran out of time for and didn't answer, but I left there feeling like she said, they're going to take their proposal is to take all of these horses off public lands and put them into private lands, which, like she said, would then lose their federal protection. It would also, I mean, it may sound whiny, but it also takes away our right to view wild horses on public lands. You
Absolutely.
know, so that's another thing. And this is why I would love to have Bill Simpson come back and talk to us some more, because he left us with more questions unanswered. He gave us a lot of information about how wild horses could help with fire mitigation. But when we asked him, can you just test your program out by taking horses out of holding?
Yeah.
Right? We've got 78,000 horses in holding, and their answer was they're not reproductive and we need to protect those genes. Well, prove your point first, right? And then um, you know, then maybe the rest of it. So yeah, he left a lot of questions, and I do truly hope that he will come back and talk to us, because again, we're not trying to fight with people. We're not trying to say you're right, I'm wrong, anything like that. We're just trying to get together and think outside the box. So
Absolutely. And the uniqueness of, again, like I said, of our wild horses and our public lands is that they are federally protected. And um getting rid of those federal protections would got, the 1971 law, it would got what we're all working towards. And so if there's a way to advocate for wild horses as fire mitigation on those public lands with those federal protections, that is absolutely something that we would love to continue that conversation about and continue looking into.
Louise wants to know, how do we bring all the new legislators up to speed on this program? New legislators receiving assignments to committees, and i.e. natural resources. I'm gonna chime in and say, I have a situation where for the last 3 years, and I'm sure Amelia is aware, I have talked to anybody that would listen to me, including everybody at American Wild Horse Campaign. So this year we have a new congresswoman, because Congressman Armstrong became Governor Armstrong of North Dakota. And I reached out to their office recently and just said, there's nothing I want their help with, right? I want you to know who I am. This is what we're doing, this is what we're working on. And they were aware of who we were, and are looking forward to working with us. But that's why those relationships are so important, and it's up to you, again, to bring your legislator up to speed, or let them know, and be the person that they're going to come to, because you have knowledgeable facts and information to share with them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to just set up those meetings and talk to your member of Congress or take action on any action alerts you see advocating for humane policies. One program AWHC has is our Volunteer Ambassador Program, and this is a program that brings together dedicated advocates from across the country and really supplies them with the materials they need to go out into their communities and go into their Congress member's office to talk about these issues. It provides them with resources, setting up the meetings, how to set up a meeting, what to talk about, fact sheets, and all of that. So if you're interested, please reach out, and we would love to help you get connected with your member of Congress and help you get the resources you need. And again, if you don't meet with them, if you meet with a representative from their office, that is just as, if not better, just as good. So definitely be sure to just start talking to them, start calling, start emailing, and our message is always more received when you're respectful and fact-based. And the really good thing about this issue is that the facts are on our side. They're all on our advocate side. You can see very plainly that these helicopter roundups are inhumane. There is a better way. It will save taxpayer money, and it will save our wild horses. And so providing all that information to anyone that you can talk to, it would be really critical. And again, AWHC would love to help facilitate those relationships when we can.
Kim wants to know, who started AWHC?
We were a offshoot of another organization, a campaign of another organization. In 2016, we became our own nonprofit.
Catherine wants to know, I tag AWHC on many, if not all, wild horse and burros I see in kill pens. Does AWHC see these tags?
We should, I'd love to connect with you about our tracking program. We do track all wild horses and burros that we see in kill pens in a database, so we're able to document them all. So if you want to email me, I'd love to connect with you on that.
Is AWHC building any legal cases for those wild horses and burros in the slaughter pipeline?
Our major case for that is going to be the litigation that I mentioned on the Adoption Incentive Program earlier over the implementation of the AIP. If we can shut the AIP down that way and make it undergo that public process, that would be a really great way to help wild horses and burros. At the same time, we're also advocating for reforms to the AIP in public meetings. I've been in collaborative groups with the BLM talking about the different ways to reform the AIP, and then advocating for it at a congressional level as well.
Well, I want to know, if we got a moratorium on helicopters, what do you think they would do?
I don't think they would do anything, and that would be a problem because a moratorium is not permanent. So then it would expire, and then they'd start up and do the same thing over again. We really need to advocate for them to start using fertility control as an alternative. Flip the model. Start, managing these horses in the wild, and then that will lessen the reliance on helicopters.
Linda asked, how much are you spending on lawsuits? And somebody did answer, last year we spent 190,000 on litigation.
Yeah, and you can see all of our financials. They're publicly available, and I definitely encourage you to check them out and take a look at where we're spending our, donor money. And yeah, that's all publicly available. And it's in our impact report if you want to find that on our website.
Andrea wants to know, and this could be an interesting conversation for a minute. Does cost or more work a factor of BLM choosing Gonacon over PZP?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Does cost or more work become a factor in BLM choosing Gonacon over PZP?
I believe so. I mean, Gonacon is actually manufactured by the government, so it's a lot easier for the government to buy and purchase and use. So that's probably a consideration when they're using Gonacon over fertility control. BLM also believes that Gonacon has a longer efficacy period. So rather, well, PZP lasts for 1 year and then mares need to be retreated. Gonacon potentially could last for a couple more years than that, but again, it's not studied, it's not shown, it's not scientifically backed, and it could lead to that sterilization. And so it's probably easier for them to get than PZP, which is manufactured privately as well.
So let me ask you this. Isn't one of the selling points of Gynecon that they're supposed to not have to administer it every year?
That's one of the BLM's proof points on that. Yes. Yeah. That's what they
So,
believe.
so what would you say to the, I don't know if you've seen the report that Theodore Roosevelt National Park put out on their use of Gynecon on the horses there from 2009 to 2024. There are some 4-year-old fillies who have had 3 and 4 doses of Gynecon. So it's not the cost effective argument, I think, went out the window there.
Yeah, and I would agree, and I think that's what we're going to be seeing more of if the BLM chooses to study the use of Gonacon rather than just blindly administering it to mares that they've rounded up. Um, we really just don't know. We don't know how many shots it takes for a mare to not get pregnant. We don't know the long-term effects of it. And so there just needs to be so much more research into the use of Gonacon um, over, over using it blindly on all our wild herds.
Um, I think the fire brigade was talking about intercepting horses that were already going to be rounded up. No, they were talking about removing all wild horses. That was my understanding. And again, Riley, everybody else too, I do believe that they have the best of intentions for preserving wild horses, but we're hoping that they'll come back to the table and have some conversations and clear up. So we're not here speculating, and I'm not going to sit here and speculate. I have more questions. Um, I have more questions than he gave us answers, and we ran out of time, so that was really unfortunate. Uh, I think we're finally to the end.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for all of your fantastic questions. Again, my email's there. Please reach out to me. I'd love to chat more. I'd love to answer any other questions that might pop up that you're thinking about. And I really appreciate, Chris and Heather for having me on and letting us talk about these issues and really bringing all of us together. Again, the Wild Horse Movement was born out of grassroots advocacy, and it really takes us all coming together for being united by our love for wild horses and moving forward as a united front. And so I really am grateful to be here, and I'm grateful for all of you to tune in and listen and ask all your questions. And thank you so much for having me.
All right, and I just put the link again in the chat. We are going to be having just a closing thoughts on the summit. So you guys are all welcome to come and join us and just have one last conversation before we end this. So thank you again, Amelia, and everybody who's been a part of this, and even all of you guys here who've been asking such wonderful questions and really being so engaged. I think that even for all the presenters, that was very heartwarming to know that we have so many advocates just hopefully willing to step up and hopefully we make a difference in 2025 for our wild horses and burros. So thank you again, Amelia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.